On today's show, the injury bug has bit the Atlanta Hawks in a big way. We'll react to all of the updates from today, and most of them are not very good for Atlanta, plus a little bit of a look at the three-point defense so far this year, a brief preview of the rematch against Washington, and much more, and all of that is on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1834 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday evening into Wednesday here at the end of October. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I also want to take the top of the podcast to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcasts. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on Amazon Music, etc., etc. We're also on YouTube. So please watch the episode. Please like the episode that you're watching as you are watching it, and subscribe, comment, tell your friends about the podcast. And I appreciate everybody for jumping in today and always to listen and subscribe and all that fun stuff to our podcast. Today, we focused on a lot of injuries for the Hawks. If you missed it, I did a full breakdown yesterday on the show, Monday night into Tuesday, of the Hawks losing to the Wizards in disappointing fashion. We'll have some basketball stuff at the end of this podcast with regard to how the Hawks are defending, etc. But the biggest story of the day by far is all of the injuries. And honestly, when I say that, I really do mean all of the injuries. There's an avalanche, a bevy, whichever word you want to say. There are injuries galore right now for the Hawks, and that's not great, especially when it's the fifth game of the season. It's still October, and they're also clustered up positionally, which makes it even worse for Atlanta. So for some backstory here, the Hawks released their official injury report for the game on Wednesday, the rematch against Washington, which is taking place tomorrow as I record this podcast. That came out as usual on Tuesday afternoon. Then when I shared that on Twitter, the reaction was, of course, very swift. People were not pleased. It included, of course, the absences of Bogdanovic and Cody Bufkin. It also included Vit Krejci being ruled out after he got hurt last night. The surprise absence of Dyson Daniels, we'll come back to in a second, and then DeAndre Hunter being questionable for the third game in a row after missing the last two games. But that was not the whole extent of things. So about 40 minutes later or so, word started to come out from the Hawks, and then it was sort of announced after the reporting was out there as well that the hammer kind of dropped, and the Hawks released their detailed updates, I would say, on some guys that we've been asking about for a while. At least I have been behind the scenes, guys who've been hurt for a few games now, etc. And with the exception of Dyson Daniels, the injury updates were not positive, the ones that came with more detail. So I want to begin with the most important one in my mind, and that is Bogdan Bogdanovic, who's been out for a while here. He is by far the best player of these guys that's out for a little while, the most established guy. I've said this all summer long, but a top three player on the roster coming into the season. Last year, I thought he was the best reserve in the entire league, for reference. Played 79 games last year, was healthy, etc., etc. It was unclear to some extent whether the Hawks were just kind of managing Bogey and taking it easy with him, or whether this latest hamstring issue was a real long-term issue. And now we know the answer to that, and unfortunately, it's not the right answer if you're the Hawks. He had a non-surgical procedure on Monday, and the update on that is that he'll be reevaluated in approximately 4 weeks from today. And as longtime listeners always know, I'll say this every time, reevaluation does not mean return. So the Hawks do not give projections of guys returning. They give reevaluations, which means that is the earliest that a player could return, not a projection. So it will be at least 4 weeks based on this projection. He'll be reevaluated at that point in time, and then we'll see from there. And that is obviously terrible news. And again, 4 weeks being the minimum, even in a best case positive scenario, 4 weeks from today means that he would miss 14 more games. So starting with tomorrow's game, the next 14, that's 4 weeks. And again, that's a very optimistic scenario. So that's a long time to be without one of your best players. They will miss they already have been missing his skill set very badly. There is not a ton of shooting on this roster as far as like real, gravity as a shooter. He's the best shooter on the team. He gets his own shot as well in a way that some guys cannot on this team. He's a good ball mover. Defensively, he won't be missed a ton, but offensively, he is a massive loss, especially in a world where the Hawks have already been piecing it together behind Trae Young in the backcourt. Boogie's in a point guard, but obviously he is a player that has some gravity with the ball in a way that most guys on this team do not. So it's a massive loss on its own. Even if this was only Bogie, I would have done a podcast. I would have led the podcast with this. It would have been a big deal, and it's the biggest deal of these injury reports. Unfortunately for the Hawks, there was more. So Kobe Bufkin. With Kobe, we already knew, at least I knew and kind of relayed to listeners that I expected it to be a little bit of time for Kobe to be out. With Bogey, there was a lot more uncertainty. With Bufkin, we knew the injury already. It was a subluxation of the right shoulder. It was going to be a little while. But now we know a more definitive timeline. The official line on Bufkin is that he's got actually begun now treatment and rehab for the shoulder injury, and he is also being reevaluated one more time in 4 weeks. That means, of course, 14 games plus, just like with Bogey. So that means that those guys are both out for a while, and Bufkin's loss means even more in a world where the Hawks don't have Bogey, and as we'll get to in a second, Vit Krejci, because Kobe was coming into the year as the de facto backup point guard. There was some uncertainty about that, even for me. Like, Kobe is a combo guard. He is the most point guard player on the roster other than Trey, but it's not like a pure situation where he was going to be doing that all the time. But he was in that role in preseason. It was very obvious. He had this big game in the exhibition slate. People were excited about that. He gets hurt right away. So that's a big loss. And again, it's magnified by the absence of Bogey and Vit, because that's 3 guys clustered at a position, or relatively around the same position. Speaking of Vit, he suffered an adductor strain during the game on Monday against Washington. If you're watching closely, I was in the building for that one. Vit was obviously limping around and was clearly pretty hurt. Went to the locker room when he came off the court. And then within 5 minutes, the Hawks had announced that he was going to be out for the game. And I said this on the show last night, if you listen to the podcast. When a player has to leave a game with a muscle injury and is ruled out as fast as Vit was, it's usually a couple weeks before they come back. It's not a definite thing, but usually it's going to be a while for a soft tissue injury like that. And right on cue, Vit's going to be out for at least 2 weeks, reevaluated in 2 weeks. So only half the time of Bufkin and Bogey, but that means that Bogey, Vit, and Kobe will all be out for at least the next 2 weeks, which is at least 8 games for all 3 of them, and at least 14 for Bogey and Kobe. And basically, this is my rule. I almost always assume it's going to be a little bit longer than the reevaluation timeline, because that's usually how these things go. Like, even when a guy is reevaluated, they're probably going to come back the next day. Sometimes they do, rarely do they. So that is 3 at least supplemental secondary ball handlers and potential primaries off the bench when Trey's not on the floor that are all out at the same time, and you just couldn't afford that under any circumstances. So, like, and then you get to the defense as well. Like, Kobe and Vit are good defenders. They're helpful defenders. Bogey, not really, but like, you're losing two-way stuff here. The biggest fire drill right now, as we'll come back to a lot later on in the podcast, is the point guard position, sans Trey. But it's a cluster, and this is a team, and I still believe this. I've talked about this a lot this summer. The Hawks invested in their depth this summer. This is a deep roster, but no team can afford what I describe even this summer as cluster injuries. And the Hawks have them now. There's 3 guys who are effectively the same position or close to it on the perimeter, all out at the same time. Things are even magnified even more because Dyson Daniels, while this is a more positive update in some respects, is going to miss the game on Wednesday. So no one even knew that he was hurt until today. The Hawks were off today because of the back-to-back they had the last 2 days. That's normal practice. But he played 36 minutes last night, and we didn't know he was injured, but he now has what the Hawks are saying is a right hip flexor strain. He is day-to-day, according to their announcement. That's obviously more encouraging than week-to-week or reevaluation in a month. But even then, like, that's not good, especially with the other 3 guys out. So Dyson is much more of a defense-first player. Like, he's been awesome defensively so far this year. He is more of a wing in some respects, but he's a guard with how they function. And another ball handler. Like last night in the game on Monday, he played point guard effectively for about 3 minutes in the fourth quarter. That isn't ideal, but he can at least kind of do that. So you could argue, and I would, the Hawks' 4 best kind of ball handling options besides Trae Young are all hurt at the same time. 3 of them for a while at least, and then Dyson for at least Wednesday. So it's tough. One other small positive. So that's a small positive because Dyson doesn't seem to be a long-term injury. DeAndre Hunter is listed as questionable for the game on Wednesday. That isn't like a positive, but isn't a negative either. We'll see if he plays. He's been questionable the last 2 games. It's the 3rd one in a row. So it's not they released a bunch of updates that were formal, and they didn't do that with Hunter, and he's questionable. So that's at least better than him being out. If you want to say that, it's definitely uncertain. And to this point, I want to be very clear. The Hawks have given 0 formal update on DeAndre Hunter beyond the injury report. All they have said is the injury report, which basically is right knee inflammation. And if you missed it in previous episodes, listen to those, but also his right knee has been a problem for 5 years. So that's the scary part about DeAndre's injury. The only unequivocal positive was Onyeka Okongwu is not on the injury report. So there's a little bit of fear because they listed him as being out on Monday with injury management. Usually that means they're being careful. I asked Quinn about that yesterday. It was a decision by the performance staff, but him being not on the injury report at all is a good sign that he actually just was being managed. There wasn't like a recurrence there with the toe. That's a positive thing. But still, man, there is so much going on with the injury report and the injury status for this team that I just spent the entire first 10 minutes of the first segment of this podcast talking just about what the injuries are. And then the next segment, in a second, I'll be talking about what happens now. Where does that leave things? How do they navigate this? I'll talk about Cody Zeller and that situation and backup point guard. That's all coming up later, as well as a brief segment on the three-point defense for the Hawks, which has been a problem so far this year. A lot more to get to, I promise you. But first, a word from our partners on the show today. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. This podcast is about basketball. If you've ever actually been to a hockey game, though, live, you don't have to have me tell you this. It's an awesome experience. It brings a sensory experience to the table. It's a lot of fun in person. And at Gametime, you get tickets for all kinds of sporting events, including basketball, including hockey, football, baseball, et cetera, plus tickets on music, comedy, and theater as well. They have a new feature at Gametime called Gametime Picks. That makes getting tickets for your favorite teams and acts even easier and much better to get, honestly, in that one place at the Gametime app. They filter out all the stuff that you actually don't want to show only incredible deals on great seats. So there's no time that's actually being wasted with searches and searches and searches. For example, there are awesome deals right now for a Hawks game at home on Friday against the Kings, including a pair of seats right now. They're $28 each, including fees on a Friday night in Atlanta. It's a pretty good deal, I think. And there's more of that happening all the time at Gametime. I love the feature at Gametime where we actually turn it on to show only the all-in pricing. So there are no surprise fees at the end of the checkout process. Plus, they have the lowest possible price guaranteed, which is an awesome feature as well. Take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with the folks at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and use that promo code. It is LOCKEDONNBA. One more time, that code is LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Gametime app today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, so I laid out kind of what the injury stuff looks like. The clusters, unfortunately, for Atlanta, but now I'll go through kind of what they have left with all these guys out. The biggest thing, of course, is the guard depth or lack thereof in the moment. And this applies to both Wednesday's game against Washington and a little bit beyond that, at least until Dyson's back, and even beyond that, when he is back, well, that'd be big to have him back. Trae Young is the only point guard on the team that they trust. Now, that was kind of the case already. Kobe was a first-time guy in that role, but they did, at least to some degree, trust Vit Krejci to handle the ball a little bit. They trusted Bogey to handle the ball a little bit, make some good decisions, etc. Now, it's Trae, and then after that, it's Keaton Wallace, who I like Keaton. They played him for 2 minutes on Wednesday in the second half. They probably have to do that again moving forward, especially on Wednesday without Dyson Daniels. I think he's going to have to play. And Keaton, if you don't know much about him, is a really good defender. He's on a two-way contract. He's a decent enough shooter. He's a decent enough ball handler for a guard, but what I would say he is not is a pure point guard. He's a combo, I think, a defense-first player at the NBA level. Not kind of, honestly, kind of similar to his brother, who's a better player than he is, younger guy in Oklahoma City, but on-ball defender, combo, decent shooter, but like not a ball handler, not necessarily a run-your-team kind of guy on offense. And now he's going to have to do that for a little while. And again, he's on a two-way contract. Like, this guy's not supposed to play a ton of minutes this year. He's going to have to play, I think, in the short term. Then, if you're scoring at home, the Hawks have three guys exactly, no more nor less, available in the game on Wednesday that I would describe as being listed as guards. Trae, Keaton Wallace, and Garrison Matthews. And Garrison Matthews is not a ball handler. He's a pure wing shooter specialist. He's a guard, but he's a shooting guard. That's what he is. And again, Keaton is a two-way combo guard who's played, I believe, like 5 career NBA minutes. That's a really, really wild place to be on October 30th, 5th game of the year. Then on the wing and the forward spots, like, obviously you have Jalen Johnson, but he's been a primary power forward in his career to this point. In fact, he's played more minutes at center in the NBA than small forward. Now, I think he can play the three, but right now he's the number 2 ball handler on the team. Like, he's been functioning already kind of in that way with Trae off the floor sometimes as the point guard nominally. He's not a point guard, but he can at least handle the ball a little bit, even more so right now. Then you have Zachary Shishé, who of course they love, but it's a rookie. And then you have David Roddy, who is a combo forward skilled guy, but not like a great athlete. Obviously, is not like a point guard type, et cetera, et cetera. So pretty light there on the wing even. DeAndre Hunter, question mark. We'll see if he plays on Wednesday or how soon he plays after that. And then the only spot that they actually have their normal depth is at center, where they have Capella, Kongwu, Nance. Mo Gay is kind of a center. Don Barlow's in the G League, et cetera, et cetera. So last night at home, they had 11 active players. They get a Kongwu back. That would be 12, but then they actually lose both Dyson and Vit. So that actually takes it. That's 10 if you use the same roster as last night. If Hunter plays, that'd be great. Obviously, Hunter is not always the most beloved by Hawks fans, but he's a very helpful player, starting level player. Awesome to have him back if he's able to play. Maybe Seth Lundy can play in the near future, but he's a two-way guy. I like Seth a lot. He's been in College Park recently as he comes back from his ankle sprain, and he talked at Media Day on Sunday for College Park to Kevin Chouinard and others, and did not sound like super like he was 100%. So I would be skeptical that he's going to be able to help you right away. And then Don Barlow is a big. Like, they don't really need a big. Like, he might be able to play. He's been banged up a little bit in College Park. They could bring him back up, but he's not going to help you on the perimeter. So all that said, I focus some of that on Wednesday because of the obvious reasons. But if Hunter and Dyson are back, it's easier to navigate. Not easy, but easier. Like, the real dire circumstance is Wednesday if Hunter doesn't play and you don't have Dyson. So you're down 5 perimeter players. That is untenable. Can they beat the Wizards? Maybe, because the Wizards are bad. And it's an NBA game. You still have Trey and Jalen. Like, they have enough players to function, but it's not a good situation on Wednesday. Even if Hunter plays, but especially if he doesn't. But big picture, the losses are focused on the perimeter. And like, look, I hope / expect to some degree Hunter and Dyson to play fairly soon. And if they're there, there's still questions, but it's a little bit easier. Here's the next segment of the podcast. I got a lot of questions in the last couple of days, even before today. I was getting questions about this every day, basically. And I had talked about it several times on the show. So I apologize if I'm repeating a little bit of this, but it's a huge topic right now. And that is the Cody Zeller situation. So basically, people are asking, how can the Hawks sign a point guard? And look, I don't expect everybody to know every rule about the NBA roster situation, hardships, luxury tax, logistics. You don't have to know all that. I get it. I'll try to explain it to you. But there are a number of factors in play. For one, at this moment, the Hawks have a full roster. So they cannot just sign someone. I know people don't always know the G League rules. They cannot sign someone to a contract without doing something else to create a roster spot. That's number one. There are some options here if they want to get a point guard in. And the most obvious one is to get Cody Zeller off the roster. Cody Zeller is on the roster. He's not with the team. He's on a guaranteed contract. And that's a little bit weird. I understand that. A key factor, and I'm not saying that it should be, but I'm saying that it is. Two different things there. The Hawks are $1.28 million under the luxury tax right now. Cody Zeller's contract is guaranteed. If they cut him, they owe him every penny of that money. Now, there is a scenario where they could buy him out, come to an agreement to pay him a little bit less than that, which Landry Fields mentioned at Media Day when I asked him about it. But Cody Zeller does not have to take any less. He could hold out for every penny that he's owed, and that's a very reasonable thing for him to do, for the record. So if you assume that they just cut Cody Zeller, waive him for the roster spot, $1.28 million is not enough to sign a guaranteed non-rookie contract for the rest of the year. So the guys that people keep throwing at me, Markelle Fultz, we'll get to those guys later. If you cut Cody Zeller and sign Markelle Fultz, you are over the tax. And the Hawks, from all accounts that I've ever heard from everybody that knows things, are not going to go into the tax. Now, there is a scenario where they do that, or something like that, and then make a move later to get back under. That could happen. But the tax, whether it should be or not, is a factor. That's one thing. They could sign a non-guaranteed contract if they waive Zeller. Again, that's always if they waive Zeller. They can sign a non-guaranteed contract that's prorated. You can waive that guy later on and stay under. But guys that you probably don't want to sign a non-guaranteed contract because then they know that they can be waived at any point. Now, that's possible they do that. It's a hypothetical. There is, again, a reason why they've been talking about with Zeller for like a month now is because Zeller wants his money. And I don't blame him for that. The people also, one more thing that somebody asked about today is the stretch provision. So under certain circumstances, you could have stretched his salary over multiple seasons to lower the cap hit. But after August 31st, This is a cap nerd thing. I understand that. That is not an option anymore. So his money cannot be stretched for this season, which is all that matters. So I get it. Like there's a standoff here. The optics are not good. When you essentially have a dead roster spot and you have a ton of injuries, like it does not look good for anybody involved. This is not Cody Zeller's fault. The Hawks have not, like, he's not just away from the team on his own. The Hawks don't want him to, haven't want him to report. Could that change? Maybe, but he doesn't help you on the court. Like the one spot that you like, look, if the Hawks had a bevy of injuries at center right now, they could call Cody Zeller and say, Cody, you're reporting. You're under contract. You have to report and play. And he would, I presume, report and play. But he doesn't help them right now. But at the same time, the Hawks are okay with him being away from the team. They're actively wanting him to be away from the team. So there's this weird situation. And here's the other thing. It's October 29th as I'm recording this podcast. There are some names people recognize that are free agents. But here's the thing. If you're a free agent on October 29th, you probably aren't very good. And that's a broad statement on purpose. But guys aren't just free agents for no reason. Like they're either old or they're hurt or they don't have great fits. And look, a couple of these guys that I'm on name are NBA players. They are. But it's not like they have this like smorgasbord of awesome options to go out and sign if they had a roster spot. That's one thing that's important. And if you're going to, there's a reason that they're available. Let's just say none of these guys would have any familiarity with the offense. For example, no training camp. You would just be signing a guy and throwing him in there. Like that might still help you, but it's not a guarantee. There are two guys that I always get asked about. It's Markelle Fultz and Dennis Smith Jr. Both are former lottery picks, relatively famous players, but both guys are defense-first players. They're not really like run your offense guys. That's one thing. Sure, would you rather have Markelle Fultz or Dennis Smith Jr. than Cody Zeller? Of course you would. But it's not that easy where they're just like have to be that's what you're going to do. So people always ask me, why can't they cut Zeller and sign Fultz? They can. They could. There are reasons why they may not, including fit, and I think more importantly, and more in the real world, money and luxury tax. But they could do that. But they have to cut Zeller first. Then you have a bunch of other guys who are less famous to some degrees. These are not in any order. Malachi Flynn's a free agent. He had a big game against the Hawks last year, famously. Devontae Graham is a free agent, veteran guard, not like a point guard, but can shoot it a little bit, handle the ball a little bit. Ryan Arcidiacono, former Villanova guard, is available. Killian Hayes is available. Not very good, but he's out there. Jamari Bouye, Jacob Gilyard, Jordan Goodwin, Kyra Lewis. There are some names. They're all free agents. That's out there. One other option is that they could waive a two-way guy and sign a guy to a two-way contract. That would cost them nothing because two-way contracts are not guaranteed. But number one, they like their two-ways. They like Lundy. They like Barlow. They like Keaton Wallace. Wallace is already a guard. So like the gap between Keaton Wallace and whoever they would sign to a two-way contract is not very big, if anything. So that's an option if they would just, they don't want to cut Barlow or Lundy, I don't think. Maybe they would out of desperation, but that's an option. Probably not going to happen. And then also, you can't sign 10-day contracts until January, even if you wanted to. So if they had a roster spot open, you can't just cycle 10 days like you can later on in the season. That's not an option until January. So the last thing that they could do on this front, and I promise I'll stop on this, they could make a trade, of course. Now, there are more high-profile trade options, like you could trade Larry Nance, or even, I know Hawks fans are obsessed with trading Hunter or Capella. I get that. But those kind of trades with guys who make 8 figures per season don't usually happen on October 29th. I said don't usually. Like they could happen, but it's complicated to try to make a trade like that of real salary and real guys in October. The more potential, I would say probably the more likely trade option is to maybe attach a second-round pick to Cody Zeller and try to go out and find a guy who makes $4 million a year as a backup point guard type. Very possible to go ahead and do that. Now, the list of options is not perfect on that either. I won't waste my time on that right now, but that might be a little bit easier to do, both money-wise and logistically, all those things. And yeah, like somebody brought up today, could you trade Larry Nance for Dennis Schroeder? Sure, but does Brooklyn want to do that? I don't know. Does Atlanta want to do that? I don't know. Like, obviously, they need Schroeder's skill set more than Nance's right now, but I don't know if they want to do that. So, like, yeah, there are ways to do it. Same with Clint. Like, you could probably go find a $20 million player that you would, yeah, the Hawks would be great, but there's logistics there. So I won't pile on anymore. But this is complicated. I understand it doesn't seem that way. It seems like, and look, in the world where money doesn't matter, which if I was a Hawks fan, this is what I would want. I would want the Hawks to cut Cody Zeller today and sign the guard that they like the most on the market, whether it's Fultz, whether it's Smith Jr., whether it's Bouye, whether it's Arcidiacono, Devontae Graham, whichever one of those guys. That is the best option in the short term if money doesn't matter. But money usually matters. This is a Hawks team that for 3 or 4 years in a row have actively made moves to ensure that they would be under the tax. And there's not a way to spin it otherwise. I'm sure I'll get a call about this. It is what it is. They have done that. So we'll see. But in the meantime, the Hawks, there's 2 takeaways here. The Hawks are in some trouble with their perimeter depth. That is unequivocally accurate at this point in time. They have a lot of injuries at the same position that really hurts you. And then this situation with Zeller is not a great one, but there also are not slam dunk options on the availability spectrum. If this was later in the year, you talk about hardship exceptions. Like there's ways to get roster spots, but in the end, the money thing matters too. So I don't know how urgent they are either. This is the last thing that I'll say. Look, the Hawks want to win, but they're not in a situation where they're going to win at all costs. Like if they think that Seth Lundy or whoever is going to help them long-term, they're not going to prioritize the short-term over the long-term like that. With Zeller, that's not a concern. Zeller is just a money thing. It really is. But there are factors in play here. I know that Quinn wants to win. They're trying to win games. There's no reason for them to tank. I got a question today. Like, why would, okay, time for the Hawks to tank. They can't, number one. They don't have their own they don't have their own draft pick, and that's not where the Hawks are. Trey's healthy. Jalen's healthy. They can win games. They're going to be, in fact, they're going to be favored to win on Wednesday, as we'll talk about in a second. But long spiel there. My apologies for all of the rambling explanations. There's just so many factors here. And injury stuff is brutal. It really is. But just to say this out loud, the season's not over. I saw a lot of that today. I get it's just fan reaction, but it's okay. They can navigate this. It is going to be challenging, but they can navigate it. Start to knock on wood and everything that you might believe to keep Trey and Jalen healthy. But as long as those guys are out there, they're alive and well, and we'll see what happens from there. All right, we'll dive in a little bit to a basketball topic in a second, at least quickly about three-point defense, because that was a question that was asked quite a bit before the injury parade on Tuesday. But first, a word from our partners on the show. All right, we'll quickly hear about the three-point defense. I got questions about that a ton. And, of course, I talked about it a lot on the podcast last night. So listen to that show for a comprehensive breakdown of the game against Washington. But the Wizards tied their franchise record with 21 threes. They shot the ball incredibly well last night. And before I keep going about this, I made this point last night as well, but I want to make sure that I stress it again so no one misunderstands me. The Hawks are giving up too many three-point attempts. That is true. The Hawks are allowing too many three-point attempts, objectively so, at this point in time. I am not acting like they're playing great, perfect defense. They've overhelped too much in some times. They need to run the guys off the line a little bit more. It is an issue that's worth noting and monitoring moving forward. With that said, they are unequivocally playing better defense across the board than they were last year. That is clear on film. They're better at every other spot on the floor as far as like contesting shots and shot attempts allowed, percentages allowed, etc., than they were last year. And I want to paint a picture about how the results right now do not match the process for the defense. So far, it's 4 games. That's the biggest thing. It's a tiny sample size. 4 games is a tiny sample size. Opponents are 75 of 178 from 3 against the Hawks. That is 42.1%. That is the worst defensive three-point percentage allowed in the league through 4 games. All 4 games, the opponent has shot 39.5% or better. I've watched every single attempt today. Again, I already watched them all multiple times. I watched them all today. All of them. Every single one for this podcast. And look, obviously some of them are good looks. That's going to happen. But I am very, very confident in saying this. The Hawks have been quite unlucky on opponent three-point shooting percentage so far in 4 games. Just on the shot quality they've allowed, 42% is an outlier. And there are crazy stats to support that. So opponents are shooting 44.9% on non-corner threes, the harder ones, above the break threes. Those are actually supposed to be the harder shots. Last year, the league leader in non-corner threes was 38%. And their Hawks are allowing 45%. So that's right there, obviously unsustainable. Then you have the pull-up threes. So the Wizards on Monday were 7 of 13 on pull-up threes, harder shots, off the dribble shots, 50+%. The Hornets were 9 of 23. The Nets were 6 of 10. So all three of those teams shot incredibly well on pull-up threes. And even the Thunder were, quote unquote, only 6 of 19, which is still totally fine. For the season, the Hawks have allowed 28 of 65, which is 44% on pull-up threes. Last year, the team that led the league in pull-up three-point percentage was at 37%. So those numbers are going to come down. They just are. It's very obvious that those numbers are going to come down. There is no question about that. Now, the Hawks do have to, again, be better and not allowing so many attempts. You are playing with fire allowing that many attempts per game. It's 40+%. Sorry, it's 40+ attempts per game. That's too many. Think about it this way. All of the principles that Quinn wants on offense for the last year plus, creating more three-point attempts, they all apply on defense. You don't want to allow three-point attempts. If your philosophy is we want to take as many threes as possible, the thought process would be that you want to allow as few as possible. And that still stands. So again, the Hawks are playing better defense. Dyson's been a godsend on that end of the floor. Obviously, he's hurt right now. Hopefully back soon. Ricochet has been playing good defense as a rookie. Even guys like Trey and Jalen, they're not playing incredibly well. Like they played better defensively process-wise than they ever did last year. But three-point shooting is the reason why they're giving up a lot of points right now. And I get that's frustrating. The Wizards tying a record is very obvious. The Nets making everything in sight to make that game close, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm not worried about the defense through that lens. There are other issues. Again, allowing too many threes, but I always want to say this out loud because I got a lot of questions about this in the last day since yesterday. Like, man, what's going on with three-point shooting? It's not great process to allow that many attempts, but man, they are unequivocally getting unlucky with how many are going in right now, and the numbers paint that picture very obviously. All right, before I sign off here, the Hawks have a deadline of Thursday to decide on rookie scale team options for 3 guys for next season's contracts. Dyson Daniels' 4th-year option is a no-brainer. That'll be picked up. Kobe Bufkin's 3rd-year option is likely, I would say, to be picked up at $4.5 million. We'll see. And then David Roddy's 4th-year option, about $4.8 million. I would guess that probably won't be picked up, but it's not a guarantee at all. So that's if that happens before the game tomorrow, I'll just acknowledge it. If it doesn't, it'll be Thursday, and I'll talk about it on Friday, et cetera. But the deadline for that is Thursday. And, of course, the Wizards preview, like we talked about it a lot already, so I'm not going to do a full preview on the Wizards game. We just saw this matchup, of course, and the injuries for the Hawks are the headliners. Hunter is questionable. Okongwu is back. Dyson is out. Everything else from the second half last night still applies. The big swing, of course, is Hunter. If he does play, the Hawks can be pretty normal, somewhat normal with the rotation. Somewhat. Obviously, no Dyson. If Hunter plays, it's easier. You can start Hunter and Jalen at the forward spots. You still got Trey. You got a center. And then you can basically play Garrison or Ricochet at the 2 most of the game. That's fairly normal. If Hunter doesn't play, a lot changes. I think, personally, if Hunter doesn't play, you kind of have to view Jalen Johnson as a 3 in this game. And also that means probably Larry Nance has to play some 4. A lot of David Roddy. I think he plays either way, but especially if Hunter doesn't play, Roddy's got to play a lot. Hunter being out on top of Dyson being out and Vit being out, and Bogey, of course, would be a new situation. So we'd learn a little bit what they're going to do there. And I think we'd probably see Jalen play the 3 more than he probably has in his NBA career. If that happens. Again, I'm speculating. I'm guessing. That's what I would do. But that's a big TBD. We'll find out on Wednesday. I'll talk about it on the podcast. And notably for Washington, no Kyle Kuzma. Kuzma had a big game shooting it like everybody else has for the against the Hawks this year in yesterday's game. He is out. So that's a notable swing in Washington, or for Washington, I should say. And as of right now, as I'm recording this podcast at like 8:30, 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday, the Hawks are still favored in the market, despite being in Washington at FanDuel by 3.5 points. Now, that makes some sense. Washington is that bad. I know they beat the Hawks last night. I get it. But this is it's in Washington, which certainly matters. But normal rest for the Hawks. If Hunter doesn't play, that number might come down, I would say. Because, if you want to be cruel about it, like trading, quote unquote, Dyson for Okongwu, given what they already have in Nance and Capella, is not going to, that's actually a pretty big loss because you just can't play all those guys together. But still, the Hawks probably are, I don't know if they're the better team. They had the best two players, in my opinion. I think that Jalen and especially Trey are better than anybody the Wizards have. But the rest of the roster is more even than you want it to be against the Washington. But we'll see how the Hawks respond, and I'll talk about it after the game. So I'm done talking. The plan for this podcast originally, before all the injury parade, was going to be a quick, 18, 20-minute podcast, and then the world ended on Tuesday afternoon. So that's why we went a little bit longer than I expected, but hopefully that sets the table. And look, there could have been more on this. There's more angles going on the roster side. If you have questions, I'll always take them at BT Rowland on Twitter or at Locked On Hawks on Twitter. Or if you want to send them to me on email, it's lockedonhawks@gmail.com. Also, please follow my non-podcast work at patreon.com/BT Rowland. You can send questions in there, read my stuff, extra audio, et cetera, et cetera. And please subscribe to this podcast. We are on all the podcast platforms that you were looking for. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, Amazon Music, Overcast, and we're also on YouTube. Please like the video as you are watching it, comment, subscribe, enable notifications, and all of that fun stuff. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll be back again after the game on Wednesday. And until then, we'll see you all next time.